Okay.
Hey.
Calling Chris Anderson.
I'm
Where
in.
Where are you? You're in a new place.
I'm
looks
in
like.
Studio W2, which is Windsor 2, because Studio W1 is still a construction site. So I'm in Windsor, which is good.
Fantastic.
Downstairs, as you can see.
I am in Studio CB.
You've been kicked out too, huh?
Yes, so my granddaughter's sleeping in my office.
Do you trust her with your dolls?
I hadn't even thought of that. Maybe I better go check. Welcome everybody to History Happy Hour. Thank you to Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours for their assistance in bringing you this show. Check out their rich offering of military history tours at stephenambrosetours.com. And Chris, whether you're watching live, are you watching live or are you watching in replay?
Live right now, sort of.
Yeah, but it will be replay. Or listening in your car to the HHH podcast.
Yeah. I'd have to lean in, though. I have a microphone down
here. I
know.
You have to kind of talk like this. Chris has a new microphone.
All you people that complained about my microphone, all of a sudden.
This is something so that he can bring it on the road.
Right.
And not weigh him down so that he can pack many books into his suitcase. I want to tell you that we were in Zelamze. Is that how you say that?
Yeah.
Chris actually bought another suitcase to bring home all the books that he had bought.
But Anna said when she saw the books, the bag, she said, "Did you buy more books?" I said, "No, I bought wine for you, dear." And so I had the books and then the wine bottles on top.
The wine on top.
There we go.
That's brilliant. That's fantastic.
I thought so.
So I brought a couple of pictures just to remember the trip by, because we were together for 2 weeks. Memory. So here we are. Do you remember where we are here?
We are in Colonel Singh's bedroom at Littlecote House, which was really a thrill and quite an honor. Don't often get to get in there, so that was
right cool. Because it's a hotel, and usually it's a room that people stay in,
and neither you nor I could afford. So
right, exactly. And then what's the story here?
So this is me doing a pale imitation of George Luz Jr. because he always does the best group shots, and that is a picture taken of our group in the field where the last picture of Easy Company was taken in Kaprun in Austria.
So I want to point out that in this, I tried to kneel down to get in this picture, but I knelt down behind you. So if you look,
I can see your foot
over your shoulder. My foot is in this picture.
Now, Rick, as a professional, documentarian video guy, shouldn't you have realized that you were hiding behind me?
Yeah, I know. But I was too busy thinking about not talking about the Ghost Army.
And that was
Chris instructed me at the beginning of this trip,
sort of tension,
not to overdo it. Mm-hmm. Really, he said don't talk about it, but I took that as don't overdo it.
Yeah.
How did I do?
I know you did.
I did.
On a 1 to 10, 7. So that's.
Oh, I could have done better. Could have just kept quiet.
It's a work in progress. That's impossible for you, Rick. I accepted that is impossible for you.
All right. Well, we should also say thank you to all our Patreon supporters, especially our top shelf supporters.
Now, is that the revised list?
I have not finished revising this list. I've been busy, Chris.
All right.
So we'll try to get it completely revised by the time we do our next show, which is our D-Day show. But the one today is going to be an encore episode on the evacuation of the Jews from Denmark in 1944, 43, 44?
Well, 40.
43 maybe?
43, I think.
Yeah. We'll find out. Watch the show.
Watch it and find out. Yeah.
And we'll find out. So we invite you all to tell us what you're drinking and where you're from and what you're doing here. And I think with that, Chris, we should get into the show.
All right. Bar is a good ring tonight, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the bar is open. In September 1943, the people of Denmark banded together to rescue nearly all of their Jewish citizens from a Nazi roundup by ferrying them to sanctuary in Sweden. Why were the Danes able to do what no other country could? Well, we're going to talk about that today with our guest, Tim Brady, who is the author of A Light in the Northern Sea, Denmark's incredible rescue of their Jewish citizens during World War II. Tim is an award-winning author. His previous books, 3 Ordinary Girls, His Father's Son, 12 Desperate Miles, and A Death in San Pietro, have received wide critical acclaim. Tim Brady, welcome to History Happy Hour.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it took a while, right? Because we tried to have you
Yeah.
a few weeks ago. It didn't work out, but now you're here. You look great. You sound great. So don't change anything. Okay.
Thank you very much. I'll do my best.
And Chris, are you drinking a cocktail today? Do you have a cocktail?
Edward Door 12.
Okay. Well, I've got some scotch as well.
What kind?
Port Charlotte, heavily peated. And I know Tim is got a, was it a Diet Coke? You said
Diet Coke.
Diet Coke.
Right.
Well, so
That
qualifies. One of us will still be sober at the end of the show, and so we're happy, Tim, that it's you.
Thank you.
The story to me really begins. You may disagree, but I think it begins when Germany rolls into Denmark on April 9th, 1940, which is the same day that they attack Norway. So how does this play out? How do the Danes react? Sort of how does this story, which involves the German occupation of Denmark, how does it get started?
Well, I agree with you. I think the story begins on April 9th, and it begins with that the occupation. It begins with the Wehrmacht rolling into Denmark, and here you have a shot of it. You can see the sort of I picked that photo for the sort of leisurely look of the German soldiers on that that weapon. I thought that sort of expressed the seriousness that they brought to bear in coming into Denmark. It was sort of a roll into the country, and the territory that they rolled into, the peninsula that runs from the German Denmark border in the south all the way up to the very tip of the peninsula across across the Northern Sea from Norway, is a very flat territory, and there was really no opposition to what the Germans chose to do as they rolled into Denmark. They also sent in troops. They sent a troop ship into Copenhagen, which is on the eastern side of Denmark, and parked it right in downtown Copenhagen at the Langelini Pier, and emptied the forces out of the troop ship and attacked the citadel, which guarded the Danish crown, with no problems whatsoever. Planes flew overhead and dropped leaflets announcing that Germany was taking over the country. And the king and the parliament gathered together in one of the palaces in Copenhagen, and in a matter of hours, they had acceded to virtually every German request.
So Tim, you have a quote in here, and this is a message that, from what I understand, that the German occupiers were given this note before they go in. It says, "The Dane is freedom-loving and self-aware. He rejects every coercion and every subordination. He lacks a sense of military discipline and authority. In other words, spare the commander, don't shout. This fills him with reluctance and is ineffective. Inform and convince in a matter-of-fact way. Use a humorous tone as far as possible. Unnecessary sharpness must be avoided." That does not read to me like a typical, German welcome card. So could you?
I thought that was quite a remarkable note that it was being passed around to German soldiers. but it sort of characterizes the German attitude towards what they were doing, and it kind of helps explain why Germany, which would subsequently prove to be less than harsh in its dealings with the Danes, both on an individual level and on a national level, what their attitude was. As far as the German Reich was concerned, it was about as mellow as it got, and it again, I thought it was quite remarkable that they were trying to sort of psychologically for their individual soldiers suggest ways to deal with the Danes.
Well, I mean, I can kind of spinning off from that. Well, two questions really. One is, why was that? And the second one is, does the nature of the occupation change, or does it stay that way?
It ultimately changes with many factors, but it begins with the Danes agreeing to all the stipulations that Germany asked of it at the beginning, but with at least one very strong counter request from the Danes to the Germans, and that was that you respect us, that you respect us as citizens, you respect our freedoms, and this was both a political request and a request for a diplomatic request, in the sense that the Germans who knew the Danes well said, if you want what you need from Denmark, which was and would continue to be its agricultural products and some measure of industrial products, then you have to you have to give countenance to who they are as a people.
So, so the Germans invade and it occupy. It's a mellow occupation. I love that idea. How many Jews are there in Denmark, and sort of what is their situation? Are they being treated in a mellow fashion by the Germans, or what's going on with them?
There are approximately 8,000, just under 8,000 Jews in Denmark at the time of the occupation, and they were part of this agreement. And this is what is, I think, a unique set of circumstances. The Jews of Denmark were full citizens of the nation. They had been granted citizenship in 1814. And to the Danes, this was an important distinction. It was a hugely important distinction. As a democratic nation, if you were a citizen, if you were a Danish citizen, it was expected that you would be given full rights of citizenship, and they demanded this of the Germans. Now, there are qualifiers to this. The Danes themselves were not without their tinge of anti-Semitism, but in the government and the monarchy, both thought that this was an important distinction that must be made in any agreement with Germany. That the Germans must treat its citizens, including its Jewish citizens, with the full rights of that were in respect that would be granted to the rest of its Danish citizens.
So, but I guess the figurehead in all of this, of course, is Christian X, and he is, when confronted with the question of his Jewish citizens, he says, "There is no Jewish question in the country. There is only my people. Or we have never considered ourselves inferior to the Jews. We have no such problems here." And is that his true sentiment, or is because I mean, there's some apocryphal stories about him wearing stars and all this sort of stuff.
It's a good question. I don't know if you the kindest view of Christian is that yes, it was his true sentiment, and he showed for a European monarch of the time, he did show some remarkable sense of kindness and willingness to live up to those sorts of feelings about his Jewish citizens. To give one example, he in 1933, on the 100th anniversary of the construction of the great synagogue in which was in the heart of Copenhagen, Christian went to the celebration and spoke at the celebration, which is just something. I mean, this is, as you know, this is at just as Hitler is rising to power in Germany. It's just something that European leaders would not jump to do in 1933. So he did have those sentiments, and he was a liberal minded in that regard. There are a lot, as you say, there are a lot of apocryphal stories, including the Yellow Star story, and there are all sorts of these quotes about that are attributed to him, saying we don't have a Jewish problem. Who knows if those sorts of quotes pop out of histories all the time, and it's hard to. There are no tape recorders there in front of him to get the exact quote.
And we saw this in this picture. He did, in fact, ride through Copenhagen pretty much every day, right, on his horse by himself.
He did. He was he was popular. He was the citizens of Denmark love him, and to this day he has this reputation of being a beloved figure. If you look at the historical record, there are more complexities to who he was and what he did, but as far as how he was viewed by the Danish people, I think it can be said that he was beloved, and that a lot of that came from his how he behaved during the war. He went out every day, as was suggested, and greeted the citizens. He was supposed to have. You see that salute in that picture. That was to Danish citizens when he passed German soldiers. So the stories would go. He would sort of ignore them, and there were more apocryphal stories about German soldiers saying, how can a monarch, your monarch, go through the city without a huge guard to protect him? And Danish citizens would say he is, because he is our monarch. He doesn't need a guard.
Yeah. So despite the benevolent occupation of their country, you do say that resistance starts to form. So I'd like to have you explain a little bit about how resistance rises up, and with an emphasis on Allsang. What is that, and what part does that play in sort of the burgeoning resistance movement?
Well, that was one of the earliest movements of resistance. Allsang was just a sort of a spontaneous movement that arose early on in the occupation, and it should be, despite the fact that it was a somewhat benevolent occupation, it should be mentioned that the Danish citizens were still, at best, resentful of the fact that Germany had occupied the nation, and the mere presence of German soldiers was sort of affront to many Danish citizens, and they were, like most European nations, proud citizens, proud of their heritage, proud of who they were. They didn't like seeing Germans wandering around in the streets of Copenhagen, the streets of any town in Germany. So there was an almost immediate sense of increased patriotism, which was among other things, the crowds coming out for Christian as he rode his horse through the city. There was this sort of spontaneous bringing together of citizens and from communities large and small, and they would just gather in public areas and start singing Danish songs, and this arose in the summer of 42 after the occupation began in the spring, and it just became sort of a national movement that eventually evolved into this situation where the national radio companies brought together a group of all sang people, all sang citizens to record and sing their patriotic songs for a national recording that was picked up on the radio, Danish radio, and broadcast all across the country.
So the early years of occupation, I mean, Denmark is occupied for 3 years, and they have their own government, right? They haven't had to get rid of their government. They've got their king, they've got their parliament, okay, and then they
even had their army and navy, if I might add.
Wow. Okay. So the Germans are treating them very delicately, and things start to change a little bit in 1943 with something called the telegram crisis. So what is the telegram crisis, and how does that change the tone of what's going on in Denmark?
That was actually in 42, but it
42. Okay.
It was a precursor to what was to happen in 43. What happened was Hitler was celebrating his birthday in I think it was September of 42, and no, I take that back. The Christian was celebrating his birthday in 42, and Hitler sent him a telegram in which he wished the king happy birthday, and the Christian wired back to Hitler something to the effect that thanks Adolf, and that was essentially it. It was just a brief 2 or 3 word response, and Hitler took great offense at this, and it just precipitated this back and forth in which the diplomatic back and forth where Hitler's minions let Christian know that he should have been a lot more effusive in his response to Hitler, and Christian just sort of again shrugged it off, and it began this sort of dampening of the warmth that had existed between what warmth I should, and I always have to qualify this a little bit. It wasn't as if the two countries were buddies, but the relationship soured after the telegram.
And what's the result of that? So like in August 43, I think the Germans essentially take over the Danish government.
Yeah, well, that is sort of the telegram crisis. Sort of marked the beginning of sense among the Danish people that this was not going to be a relationship that could last, and it sort of fostered this notion, not just among the people themselves, that something had to change, and so it just began a sort of cycle of resistance that started to grow, and as a response to the relationship. And it was never a relationship that was going to sustain itself. And through 43, a number of things happened. Through late 42 and into 43, the SOE, the British resistance forces, aiding the resistance forces throughout Europe, started to become a presence in the country. There were individual resistance things, like there were a group of teenagers called the Churchill Boys who started to just small resistance things in a small town in Denmark that got a lot of national attention. The boys were arrested and imprisoned for putting graffiti on German arms and not attacking in a serious way, but doing sort of juvenile things to German forces that were in Denmark. And there was just this growing sense that things needed to be done within the resistance movements, and more serious resistance organizations started to form. The communists the Communist Party in Denmark formed a resistance group that started to do more serious sabotage. And then there's this group called that would come to be called Holger Dansk, which started to form and started to do, again, more serious operations against German troops and German forces within the country.
But Tim, I mean, there's, so many of these stories, there's lots of nuances to it. And one of the things I kind of wanted to get your comment on is kind of this sort of split personality almost when it comes to the Jewish issue. You say that the Danes are aware of some of the excesses of the Nazis. You say that they are aware of when Norway's Jews are put on trains and basically sent through Denmark, I guess, that they know what the cargo is.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have other Danes that are resisting this, and you mentioned Bispebjerg Hospital.
Yes.
So how are the Danes kind of digesting this?
There is a split. There's a definite split. There's among the Danish Jews themselves, there's a split, because the Danish Jews themselves are not terribly eager to jump into a resistance mode with the German soldiers occupying the country, perhaps for obvious reasons. Jews didn't want to stick their heads out too high, didn't want to stick their necks out too far, for fear of having it pinched by the Germans. And you don't want to bring attention to yourselves if you're going to find yourself in a death camp because of it. They're not unaware. The Danish Jews are not unaware of what the Germans are capable of. They've certainly been witness to a Kristallnacht and other German deprivations, and are, by 1942 they're starting to hear stories of the death camps, and so it's a question of how how do we how do we manage a situation where this oppressive nation, oppressive and very, very powerful nation, is occupying our country? We love the country, we love the freedoms associated with this, but how do we get through this trying period? And you have happening at the same time the impulse of Danish patriots to get Germany out of the occupation. And there's a further complication that the Danes, resistance members, and the Danish resistors are aware that they are not that popular with Allied forces outside in the larger picture of the war itself. Denmark is seen by many of the Allies as providing Germany comfort and food and agriculture for their war effort, and so there's this another eye is keeping track of what's happening in the war at large, and I'll get to this in a moment, but by late summer of 1943, it's coming to be understood by the resistors in Denmark that Germany is not doing so well anymore, and that with the Eastern Front being turned back, and with the Western Front pushing up through Italy, the resistors in Denmark are saying, the Allies might actually win this war. What are they going to say when they asked, what did Denmark do to help us? And so there's this question of how are we going to become a more forceful member of the Allied nations?
I want to remind everybody that we're chatting today with Tim Brady, who is the author of the book A Light in the Northern Sea, about the rescue of the Jews in Denmark during World War II. So we're halfway through our show, so we probably should get to this rescue, right? I think I said in August 43, the Germans essentially take over the Danish government, and sometime after that, they decide that they are going to come for Denmark's Jews. And there's a couple of people here who are involved in this effort, who are big players in this story. One is named Werner Best, and one is named Georg Duckwitz. Can you tell us, kind of give us a sense of what's going on and the role that those two people are playing?
Werner Best was the chief operations officer, let's say, for the Germans in Denmark. Duckwitz was an aide of his who ran shipping, the shipping divisions of the German Reich in Denmark. Duckwitz was a man who had lived in Denmark for some length of time, and had many close friends there. Was very sympathetic to the Danish people, and had been one of the chief advisors in how to deal with the Danes, and how it would be necessary for the Germans, if they wanted everything they needed from the Danish people, how to treat them, and so he was advising that that the Germans treat the Danes with as much respect as they thought they deserved. And Best was someone who was interested in staying on the good side of the German hierarchy in Berlin, as well as administering to the Danish the problems in Denmark. When in August 43, as the resistance in Denmark became more pronounced and more effective, and included sabotage, like blowing up a large exhibition hall in Copenhagen, and which prompted the sense in Berlin that something had to be done. Best was called back to Berlin to have the riot act read to him, and was told essentially, things have got to change. We can't allow this problem, which of course in the interpretation of Hitler and the leaders of the Reich, had much to do with the Jewish problem of Denmark. He was essentially told, Best was essentially told, get your act together, get Denmark's act together, and was sent back to Copenhagen to do just that. His response was essentially, okay, we're good. This is the time for the crackdown is now. We have to rectify this this problem, which by rectifying it, we mean rounding up the Jews and finally, ultimately getting rid of the Jewish population. Duckwitz, the shipping guy, the guy who had been serving as sort of an ally of the liberal forces that were maintaining the status quo for the Jewish population in Denmark, tried to help matters for the Jews by going to Jewish political leaders and democratic socialist leaders that he was friends with and acquainted with, to advise them that this was happening.
Chris?
Oh, I'm sorry. You guys froze up for a second.
Oh, okay.
So Tim, so the Germans, they decide they're gonna finally do something about this quote unquote problem. They pick a date, and what's their plan? How are they going to do this?
Basically, they increase the amount of Gestapo into Denmark. They send them more Gestapo forces. They get they're going to round up the Jews basically by bringing in more forces and doing a sweep. And they've already done preliminary work, such as going to Jewish communities, going to the great synagogue, getting lists of Jews from the synagogue, stealing them, just breaking in and pilfering information about the Jewish community and Copenhagen. And it should be noted that the primary number of Jews in Denmark was centered in Copenhagen. And so by going to the great synagogue and in Denmark, they were getting a pretty comprehensive list of Danish Jews.
And the plan is that it's going to be like a lightning operation, right? They're trying to round them all up.
Yeah. And things are going to get a little even more muddled here, because there's a question now, and Best and Duckwitz are sort of at the center of it. The question becomes how serious and how important is the roundup to Germany and Berlin. And this is a historical question that is still argued. The effort made by the Germans to round up the Danish Jews begins in earnest. It begins with this a lightning, just as you suggest, a lightning quick roundup of the Jewish people. They go to they go door to door basically and start collecting people and taking them to. I mentioned the Langolini Pier before. There a couple of ships are brought into large ships are brought into Copenhagen Harbor. There's already been established a, a German camp in Denmark, something of a concentration camp in Denmark that has collected communists and some of the early Jewish leaders of the community who've already been arrested after the initial crackdown on Jews. And their march down to the pier in Copenhagen and put on these one or two of these large ships that have pulled into Langolini Pier. There are trucks that are driving through the streets of Copenhagen, gathering up the Jews from community. There's a senior home that is in particular a source of elderly Jews and Jewish families, and they're going door to door. At the same time, the Jewish community is sending out the alarms, and the great synagogue on the evening of Rosh Hashanah, which is when the eve of Rosh Hashanah, which is when word gets out to the Jewish community. Word spreads from the service that this is happening, and Jewish families, Jewish citizens are again, they're just as the roundup is going door to door. They are going door to door. Individual Jews to alert their brethren that this is happening, and the advice is to get out of Copenhagen, get out of your homes, and start heading towards safety.
So safety in this case would be Sweden. And you can see on the map here that Sweden is right across the water, not terribly far from Denmark, 50, 75, 80 miles away. But Sweden is wary of taking in Jews. So what changes their mind? What convinces Sweden to say, okay, you can come here?
There's a lot of pressure put upon them from Danish citizens, including Niels Bohr, who is a world famous physicist and himself the subject of pressures to. He is the son of a Jewish mother, and he was not a practicing Jew himself, but he was considered himself a member of the Jewish community, and he was as I said, he was a world famous physicist. And in fact, he along with Einstein, he was probably the world famous physicist, and he was a guy who was wanted by the Allied community and the German community because of his knowledge and the brilliance that he could bring to projects that both were interested in, namely the construction of a nuclear bomb. And the Allies had contacted him early in 1943, asking him to consider coming out and heading towards England, where he could become part of the process of constructing that bomb. And so he had been gotten in touch with and was considering leaving the country for a while, hesitated to do so until the pressures became too much to bear, and as the resistance grew, as the crackdown on the resistance began, he finally found himself in an untenable position and knew that he had to leave, and so he headed to Sweden himself, really at a last hour, and went, but knew that he had to do something for his Jewish community. And so when he finally got to Sweden, he went to see the leaders of the Swedish government and implored them to accept the Danish refugees.
Okay, so now, we know that the Germans have decided to take the action. We know that the Jewish community is kind of aware of this. But it's one thing to know you have to get out. It's a much bigger thing to figure out how you're going to do that. And again,
Right.
One of the things that's so impressive in the book is how quickly this rescue effort comes about, is organized. And so how is it, who comes up with this idea to put them on boats and send them to Sweden?
I know, because
how does it all come together so quickly?
right, because it almost feels like it happens right under the Germans' noses, like it's the plot of some ridiculous movie, that this is it, that they're able to pull this off.
It is. It struck me immediately when I started to research this how remarkable those circumstances are. You just don't see this sort of thing in history. It's just. And this is I think the story of the Danish people and their heroics and their sort of collective willingness to put themselves in harm's way to aid a people. It came sort of in an unorganized fashion, but somehow collective, in the sense that the Danish people as a collective body were aimed in this direction. I'm being cautious in what I say here, because I don't want to suggest that every Dane was a part of this movement, but there were enough Danes who decided they needed to do something to help the Jews, their Jewish population, escape, that it came to fruition that this happened. And it happened in a remarkably short period of time. And it was I try to highlight a few of the stories that impressed me most deeply. And one family that I highlight throughout the book is the Keeler family. And one of the reasons that I do is because they just provide such a moral center for what was, in my estimation, for what was good about these efforts. This is Jürgen Keeler, who was the oldest boy, a medical student at the University of Copenhagen, and he became sort of the center of a group of. He ultimately became a part of the Holger Dansk movement, which I don't know if we'll have time to talk about, but he lived in an apartment with two sisters, Elsebeth and Bente, and a brother, and the four of them lived together, and they started to work to gather money, raise funds, organize, collect Jews. I mean, what you had to do, you needed money to pay for the passage. You needed to find out where the Jewish community was, and you need to get a means to take the Jews from Copenhagen across the strait to Sweden. So you needed fishing boats, you needed or boats of any kind. You needed transportation. You needed to pay for the transportation. You needed to find places to hide out prior to going, hide out once in preparation for the trip itself, meaning in like warehouses down by the docks. You needed all of this sort of organization, and yet somehow they were able to do this. And it should be mentioned too. Chris, I think you had mentioned Bispeberg Hospital, which was the hospitals in Copenhagen, and the medical community in Denmark at large was very vital to this. There was this. There was that particular hospital helped steer hundreds of Jews out of the country. They hid them out. Nursing communities within the hospital allowed them to stay in their nursing dormitories. They did things like they would collectively take a group of Jews and put them in transportation from the hospital down to the piers. There's so many stories of this sort of heroism of getting people out of the country that it's. I just would advise you to
read the book, guys. Read the book. Hey, so I've always had this sense, and reading this book, I still had this sense. I wonder if you share it. I have this sense that in essence, the people of Denmark stand up to the Germans, and that ultimately the Germans back down. That it's basically, if you stand up to a bully, you can get the bully to back down. Now, do I have that right, or would your interpretation be different?
I hate to deflate that, but the fact of the matter is that there are complications in this story that one aspect of the story that is sort of underplayed is the fact that the question of how serious were the Germans about eliminating through the camps the Jews of Denmark. And it's a question that needs to be broached, because the fact of the matter is that the efforts to capture all of the Jews of Denmark could have been more serious on the part of the Germans. And the answer to why not is one that historians still struggle over, and it's still a question in Denmark itself.
So Tim, I mean, one question I have one question that some guests have asked, and then I'm going to have one final question. But the quick nuts and bolts question is: so how many Jews were rescued, and what percentage of the country's Jewish population was saved?
95% at a minimum. And these figures are pretty well documented, and I don't have the exact numbers at the top of my head, but I think that in total there were about 500 Danes, Jewish Danes, who lost their lives in the Holocaust.
All right. So, and kind of I guess the final question, or the big question is, Rick and I spend a lot of time in studying the Second World War. You obviously have. You've written about it several times. And it's generally a pretty sad story when it comes to the Holocaust.
Yeah.
For a whole lot of reasons. But, and I understand that there are nuances, but it seems to be a little bit different in this case. What is it? Why? What is it about the Danes?
Yeah,
what is it about? I mean, are they somehow special people, or why is the story different in this case?
This is a question that I've been doing this a long time, as you suggested, and I have the skepticism of an old journalist. So, when I see a story like this, I think, well, what's
Right.
what's going to undercut this story? And
Sure.
Danes, I think, and I really am hesitant to speak largely about the Danish population, which I don't know that well. I mean, I've looked at it for purposes of this book, but I don't know the Danish people that well. So I have a hard time answering that. I will say that I have, since I started working on this book, I am truly impressed by their character, their sense of humor about themselves. But most importantly, I think, is they have a sense of egalitarianism and a sense of democratic purpose. I'll tell you, I got interested. I started to work on this book during the initial period when Russia invaded Ukraine, and I was struck then at how Ukrainians responded to that invasion, and I was struck by their seeming democratic spirit and democratic notions of themselves. Likewise, I think I found that in this story too, when I looked at the Danes, and they truly believed that to be a Danish citizen was a special thing, and so that the Jewish community, by being part of the Danish citizenry, had all of the protections of being Danes, and I think that was the driving force behind this spirit of rescue and salvation that drove them.
Well, Tim Brady, we want to thank you so much for joining us today. And there's so much we didn't get to cover, so we didn't talk too much about the rescue itself. We could talk about the role of the Gerda 3 and Henny Sindig and what she did with that, or the white buses that rescued people from the concentration camps. But we just don't have time for that right now. So it's reasons to buy the book. And the book, of course, as we've mentioned, is A Light in the Northern Sea by Tim Brady. Thank you so much for joining us today.
So much, Tim.
Thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Excellent.
Good. Thank you, sir.
Okay. How about next week? Chris, what are we doing next week?
Well, next week is going to be spectacular.
Ooh,
yes.
Wow.
We're doing our D-Day special, and I think we talked about even actually maybe going a little bit longer, because we have a panel, have some pretty impressive guests. And then you and I will just kind of be
we could be considered impressive.
Legends in our own minds.
Yeah. Sometimes, occasionally, there's a person on tour who's impressed with something that we say.
Okay.
So, yes, but we're going to have Joe Balkowski is going to be with us again for his 6th time on History.
What else are we going to give Joe?
I don't know.
Kind of got everything.
We could make him a co-host of the show. And John McManus, I think it's going to be his 3rd time on the show. And so I would say to people, give us your best, your hardest, your most challenging D-Day questions.
Yeah. And by the way, I just want to say now, I haven't seen the new movie with Brendan Fraser. I'm not going to see the new movie with Brendan Fraser. So please don't ask me what I think about the new movie with Brendan Fraser. Okay.
I might see it, but I have to say I watched the trailers and didn't like what I saw on the trailers because to me, Brendan Fraser could never be Dwight Eisenhower. And then, and they were all yelling a lot, which is somehow not kind of how I envisioned the whole thing. And I've read 2 reviews of the film, and they're both like meh. So
well, yeah, but since we have such an impressive panel coming on the show, I want to talk about the event.
The actual D-Day. Right. So send your questions to us at info@historyhappyhour.com.
Yes.
We will not talk about the movie. Meantime, please subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, shout at us on Blue Sky, listen to our podcast, back us on Patreon, and browse historyhappyhour.com.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.